Hello and welcome to Noles Quality Control. I'm your host, Ben Meyerson. I'm here today joined by Tommy Mire. We're both writers over at Tomahawk Nation. We've been going to spring practice, since before spring break for these Seminoles, actually. We've been going for about a month now, trying to gather as many notes as we can, trying to get information to FSU fans. So, first of all, if you are an FSU fan, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're over on Twitter at Tomahawk Nation's Twitter, you can just click on the YouTube link or search Ben Meyerson Football. That's my YouTube channel, and that's where we'll be broadcasting all of these live streams. You can look forward to another one of these on Friday at 1:30 with the editor of Tomahawk Nation, Perry. And I was going to try and pronounce Perry's last name, but you know what? I'm going to have him correct me before I even attempt it because it would have been a miraculous failure on my part.
I think
But
it's Dacus, I think.
I believe it is too, but I also don't want to be wrong, Tom. It's one of those things with Perry. He's our boss. He's our editor. I don't want to mispronounce his last name. And I know he's already corrected me on it, so I don't want to say it wrong again. But everyone, we've been attending spring practice, like we just said. We have some footage to bring up for you guys. We'll be talking about everything Seminoles. We'll run through some of the things we've been seeing at spring practice on offense and defense, the state of the offensive line, the state of the defensive line. We'll talk about a realistic record for FSU to, look forward to in 2022 and where we think that this team can improve on both offense and defense. But again, thank you for joining us today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, let us know if there's any questions you guys have. And there's even a poll over on YouTube, a win total for FSU. It's about 6.5. I put it in our comments section. Let us know if you think they're going to go over 6.5 wins or under 6.5 wins. But to start things off, we're going to go over to some clips that we have from spring practice. And specifically, we're going to talk about this offense and Malik McClain, Jordan Travis, the connection they've been able to build up. So as you can see, we have some of the clips over here. We're going to go first over to yesterday's practice where it was a really nice completion from Jordan Travis to Malik McClain. And let me just back up a little bit. So that's the play right before. And here we have Malik just coming across the field. And you know what, Tommy? This looks pretty familiar to me. It looks like a 4th and 14 down in Miami. So, obviously we're only allowed to show so much from practice. We can only talk about so much. But for you, Tommy, with what you're seeing between the connection with Malik and Travis, how's that been? And do you think that Malik McClain is going to be that wide receiver one that I think a lot of fans are just kind of assuming him to be?
It's been their connections have been great, and then also drop passes, but you can't judge everything on that. I think they do have a good connection, and they like using him over the middle in a couple of different down and distance situations. I also like Tony Wilson as well, so I think those two will be at least the taller wide receivers in the rotation.
Yeah, they'll be the outside receivers for sure. And you mentioned Johnny Wilson. I actually have another clip, and this is from practice March 31st. This is about a week ago, last Thursday. And the first clip we're going to see is Jordan on the run throwing to Malik. Here's the two different angles of it. And, when I think of Jordan Travis and how the Seminoles are going to be able to succeed in this passing offense, we'll talk about the improvement of the offensive line, how that position should make life easier for Jordan. But his escapability, his ability to get outside the pocket, to move, to create his own play off script, it's going to be a huge reason why this team is successful if they are. And I think, for him, he's got to get a little better at evading the pressure, not getting sacked as often. But even then, like we've talked about, Tommy, on multiple occasions, we expect the offensive line to improve and make life easier in that sense for him. So, what do you make of where he is as a scrambler and maybe where the team can improve around him in that aspect?
Well, he's definitely still the same Jordan Travis on the ground. Like
Yeah.
he's quick and elusive, and it's almost like, well, because there's no contact right now, but it's almost like whenever he takes off, like the kind of just like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, they are constantly whistling Jordan Travis when there's any pressure on him. And
Yeah,
specifically, I mean, we'll talk about the defensive line, but that interior defensive line is has been getting after Jordan, especially these last few practices. So I do want
they
to show.
even Norvell on Thursday even told Odell Higgins to make sure they don't hit the quarterback.
I remember that. I was actually just going to mention that he specifically looked over to him, said, "We got to protect the quarterback better. Tell your guys to make sure they are protecting our guys," because I think there were a few instances where the pressure that they were getting was
It's
just a
just too
little too
much.
close for comfort, right?
Yeah,
And you talked about Johnny Wilson too. He's someone I do want to spend a second on here because he's going to be this next player we're going to see coming up. He's going to come across the middle, just be wide open. And to me, when we're talking about the FSU receiving core, you know, Mike Norvell is focused and he does so much. You know, with these slot guys, with these unbalanced sets where he has three receivers on one side of the field. So I don't know. There's not going to be that role as much for that outside guy that you might see in a traditional offense. But I will say that the two outside guys they have, the two outside guys who have been getting the most targets through spring practice, it's been Malik and Johnny Wilson. And with Wilson specifically, to me, we saw him. He was dealing with some sort of injury, some sort of nagging thing. But once he was, you know, kind of fully unleashed, you can clearly see that there is going to be a role for him in this offense in 2022. And I think Seminole fans should have high expectations for him, but also understanding that he is a little bit of a project where I think, you know, looking at him this time next year, he's going to be even better than he is right now. And he might be a big reason why the Seminoles are successful on offense.
I even think towards the end of fall camp, you're going to start seeing, like, not he's already good, but you're going to start seeing a really, really good receiver, just mixing in with the system. You know, having all these practices and then another camp. I think you should probably see a lot more improvement, but not that he isn't already good.
Right. I just think, you know, he's still getting comfortable in the offense, and there is still a little bit of the details going on. You know, every once in a while he'll have a drop, or he'll, you know, have he'll be coming out of his break and he'll slip just a little bit. But I think when we do see those flash plays from Johnny Wilson in spring practice, Tommy, it's very clear the upside he has. And I think you mentioned to me yesterday at that Tuesday spring practice that he's the favorite target of these quarterbacks so far. And he's kind of a security blanket for these guys.
He's so big.
Yeah.
And even on that
No.
touchdown yesterday, like they had Bernardo Green on him, and Green's like a foot shorter. And it was just a complete matchup and an easy touchdown, which was good. And then I think a couple plays later, he had one hit him in the chest that he dropped, which we were all like, ah. But
Yeah.
offense was the most exciting these past few practices.
Yeah, I think in general the offense has been really good, and especially what we've seen from those new guys. And one of the new guys that I know we have to talk about because I know fans love him is Micah Pittman. And I think while, you know, maybe he didn't have like a crazy practice on Tuesday or anything. From what we've seen from Micah Pittman
He's
consistently
solid.
practice after practice, he is solid. I think, Tommy, tell me if you think I'm wrong. I think he's probably going to be their most reliable receiver next year because you know exactly what to expect from him, and he's going to give you what you want.
Yeah, he's gonna be up there. I think the competition is what's really gonna turn out as far as like targets. But you know, if he's the one catching the ball consistently, then he's gonna get the ball along with, you know,
Right.
blocking.
But I think looking at this receiving core, there's not going to be any single receiver, right, who's going to be, you know, the breakout guy, who's going to be the most dominant player on the field. And if there is going to be that guy, I think it's going to be Malik McClain out of anybody. But from what we've seen from Micah so far, I think he has that ability to put together, a consistent 2, 3 game stretch where if you're down on injuries and Jordan Travis, like let's say Johnny Wilson's missing for a game or Malik McClain isn't available or whatever it might be, Micah Pittman again is that kind of security blanket where we might not see the strength of the tight end room where usually conventionally, when you talk about a security blanket in an offense, it is that tight end position. There just haven't been as many guys that we've seen at that spot really standing out. Some guys have had some consistent camps, but I think from the receiving position, you have Cam, of course, and then there's a drop off. So I think there's going to be a reliance on a lot of these inside slot receivers, your Keyshawn Heltons, your Micah Pittmans. And I think a realistic expectation for Micah Pittman could be something in the range of 600 to 700 to 800 yards, 4, 5 touchdowns, something like that. He just seems like a high volume player for this Seminole offense where they're going to rely on him a ton out of the slot. And we know how often they use these slot guys, right, in this Mike Norvell offense. He's going to get plenty of opportunity. And then beyond that, too, he's going to be an impact special teams player for this team. So I think Micah Pittman is one of those guys that you look at all these new transfers coming in, and I think him or him versus maybe Johnny Wilson or even Deuce Spann, he's going to be more consistent than those guys on a game-to-game basis where you might see the flashes with Johnny Wilson. You're going to see big plays. You're going to see at times where you think, man, is this FSU's best receiver? But I think to me, Micah is the more reliable, the dependable receiver out of this entire group.
I definitely like Micah Pittman. I'm glad that we have him.
Yeah, and Seminole fans
he's got a lot of good traits and a great personality, actually.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too, Tommy. His personality is awesome, and when we do these player interviews, I'm not trying to fault some of the guys. Some of the guys just give shorter answers to things, right? And I'm not judging anyone, but I will say with Micah, he just gives these nuanced, extremely detailed answers. I remember there was one specific one where he got asked about punt returns and why he's so good at it and what he looks for. And he said since I've been 6 years old, he's been studying the rotation of the ball, the way the ball balances, what the distance is when it's coming down at you, where the ball peaks, and just all these little details, these nuanced things that were just really impressive to me. And he's clearly a veteran already, and he's going to be one of the leaders in that room. I mean, they already have guys like Keyshawn Helton who've been around for a while and who are probably pretty vocal, I would say. But to me, him, Micah Pittman, those guys seem like they have really good leadership qualities in that room.
I agree.
Yeah. And hey, here's Logan from Noles Game Day. We see Logan. That's Logan Robinson. He's all over the place. You guys can see him over at Twitter. I'm sure if you're an FSU fan, you're familiar with him. Shout out to Logan. Appreciate you hopping in, coming on for a little bit, man. And one more position, Tommy, I do want to touch on before we move on to the offensive and defensive line is this running back room. Obviously, you have Jashawn Corbin, who's entering the NFL draft. He's not going to be on this team next year. But Treshaun Ward, we talked about this a little bit last show. He's kind of that running back one, or you assume he's that running back one. But when you look at this rushing offense overall, what do you think it's going to be like compared to even last year where we saw so many guys get different opportunities? How do you think this room is going to break out?
I think it's going to be very similar. There's a few guys that are really shifty, like just getting that one little crease and taking it to the distance. And then you have some guys that are just bowling balls like Benson and DJ Williams and CJ Campbell. So I think that you're going to see basically what it was last year, just explosive runs. And I think we're going to improve on the harder hitting runs, like pushing around people type deal.
So you think they should be improved on the goal line then? I guess that's what – yeah.
I think so from what I've seen so far.
I agree with that. And I think to me part of that is – and we'll get into some PFF rankings later, but I think this team actually ranked last out of the ACC in run blocking. Their run block rate was just god awful. There's no other way to get around it. So I think, this running back room should be aided by an improved offensive line and hopefully more consistency at that position.
Because
You
the
mentioned
blocking has been good so far.
right, it has been. I think we had Robert Scott do player interviews yesterday. He talked about this specifically, how you know last season when they would finish practice, or when they'd go into the meeting room with Coach Atkins, he'd bring up negative plays first. He'd bring up plays you need to improve on, and then he would bring up the positive ones. And Robert Scott said after practice yesterday that we're seeing a lot more of those positive plays this year and a lot less of those negative plays. And I think while the interior of the defensive line has been really getting after this offensive line, that room should be improved. It should help this team be better. And I think just looking at some of the guys that you touched on, DJ Williams to me is going to be one of those guys too, who's going to get involved in this running game. And I think you nailed it. What we saw last year, I think, is going to be very similar to what we see for this rushing offense again. And we see Mike Norvell's level of success with running back. So I think, the running game should be improved by the offensive line. But I also think they have diverse running backs who can do all kinds of different things, who, depending on game situation, game flow, the opponent, they should be able to throw all kinds of different guys.
I think there's going to be a lot more passes to the running backs as well, because they've been consistently catching the ball. Yeah,
and
we're lined up.
And I would say kind of like all those guys at the top of that depth chart really do look comfortable as pass catchers. I think that's something pretty consistent that we've seen all throughout camp. And I think, another guy I want to mention, and I think you may have mentioned CJ Campbell.
Yeah.
He is awesome, man. He's been awesome. He should get his opportunity this season. And I think we all expect him to be if he's not going to be a scholarship player, he's going to be a huge impact player for the Seminoles this upcoming season. So I think if you're an FSU fan, I would say the state of this running back room in terms of, where is it from last year to this year? I would say if it's not the same, it's slightly better, because I think all the guys you have in-house have improved as well. Obviously losing Jay Sean doesn't make you better, but I think with all the different guys who will get opportunities next season, this rushing offense should be the same, if not slightly better than it was. And it was already one of the best in the ACC.
I agree.
Yeah.
They're just going to need to find that guy, that every down back, which might be one of the new guys.
Yeah, I could see it definitely being Trey Benson. I think, to me, in terms of if you're talking about, one guy who is going to be that lead sort of back for them, I think I'd put my money on Trey Benson, because I think he's big enough to do it. He's versatile in what he can do, and he's had a lot of explosive plays, especially recently. I mean, obviously, I think, rushing is one of those things that's just tough to judge in these practices, the way they coach them, the way they call it sometimes, but
what the situation is,
exactly. A lot of what they're doing is situational football, and just a lot of the times these backs aren't necessarily put in the best position where it's an obvious run situation in practice. So I think we'll see at the spring game, maybe who they favor, who they don't favor. But to me, the top of this room, it's Trayshawn Ward, it's Trey Benson. And then after that, I think there's a lot of guys who all kind of fall in the same range.
I agree.
And kind of looking at spring practice, one of the rooms to me that has stood out the most is this offensive line. And I think, looking at what they did last season and where they are now, this should be, in my mind, the most improved room out of all the position rooms on this team. And it's for a few reasons. For one, they're bringing in guys who have experience. Caden Lyles, Bless Harris are both players who could easily start for the Seminoles. If they were playing, in a week from today, I would put my money on those two players getting a significant amount of play time. And I think with how the offensive where they struggled on the offensive line last season. More specifically, if you look at some of the PFF pressure rates, the left tackle, the left guard were the two best positions that they had last year in terms of pressure rate, the two lowest in terms of allowing pressure. The center and the right tackle were the positions that let up the most pressures out of any position. So I think bringing those two guys in, having that depth there, and then Tommy, I was also just kind of looking up and down the roster. This team is going to bring in 6 guys who are either freshmen or redshirt freshmen. So I think the room where it is now versus where it's going to be in the future, this room is going to be even better year after year, as long as they keep bringing in the type of recruits they have been bringing in, and bringing more transfers as well, like kind of we expect them to after this season. But looking at the state of the offensive line, I think the offensive line is in a really good place to be much improved. They just got to get lucky with injuries. Like they were just so unlucky last season.
Yep. But at least now they're starting to not be just one injury away from a terrible season down there, because they have quality depth or serviceable depth, and plugging holes in the offseason with transfers was what they needed to do.
Yeah, and I think,
And it
like
should.
I touched on, they filled probably their two most important positions. I think the center position is one of those spots that it's going to be really improved, and then that right tackle spot, like we talked about, Bless Harris. Bless Harris is a really good, young, talented player, and he's been having some great battles against guys like Jared Verse, Derek McClendon. So I think overall the state of the offensive line is improved, right? And I think, like you mentioned, they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't be in the position they were last season. They just won't be. They put themselves in a spot where, of course, if it's a very dire situation, there's just nothing you can do about that. But if their injury rate isn't out of the roof, they're not going to be one player away from the offensive line just collapsing, like you said. And I think that should be a rising tide for this offense. It should be one of those things that should improve overall. And one thing I also wanted to look at before we get to the defensive line.
Yeah,
um,
Logan's asking about it in the chat.
yeah, I see Logan. We'll get to you next,
Segue.
Logan. I appreciate the comment in the chat. We'll touch on that. I just wanted to show some of the PFF rankings from last season for Florida State in terms of run blocking. And, looking overall, the offense ranked second to last. There's kind of just no way to get around that. They struggled a lot. And there were a lot of reasons for that. But more specifically, we go over run blocking. This team ranked, if you can see my mouse over here,
Oh,
dead
wow.
last in run blocking, and having a 52.2 run block rate. Let's just say it's not good. It's pretty bad. Even amongst the ACC, there's only 3 schools that are even below 60. And most of these teams are in the green, as you can see. And I think this should be one of those things, like we were talking about, like we saw with Robert Scott, like he spoke on. They're better right now than they were last season already as a run blocking unit, and it should make life easier for everyone. As good as the rushing offense was, it should be even more improved from last year. And then I do want to bring up the pass block rates too. So, while they weren't as weak in pass blocking, I think part of that probably has to do with Jordan Travis's escapability, right? The fact is he's an escape artist. I think he's almost at the top of college football quarterbacks in terms of time to throw. And a lot of that wasn't because of his offensive line, right?
Yeah,
So
they weren't really doing him many favors.
no, no, no. In fact, they were making life very hard for him. So when we're looking at this spring game, I don't know if we're going to get the best idea of where they are at with pass blocking, but I think overall the position group, like I said, with most of this stuff, it's a rising tide, and it should make life easier for the rest of the offense. If they can just improve the run blocking, it's going to make pass blocking that much easier, right? And it all kind of goes in consequence with the team.
What's interesting about this is kind of off topic, about what Mike Norvell said about the spring game, he's just going to do offense and defense. He's not going to split them up into two teams. I wonder if that he still feels that depth is an issue, or if that's just the way he does things.
I would say that's interesting. I think
Should have asked him that.
yeah, we should. We'll ask him that. We'll ask him after next practice. That's something we should definitely ask Mike Norvell, and people should keep an eye out for that. But yeah, and by the way, Logan said, "Woo, yikes! I didn't know it was that bad." Yeah, no, this team was just awful in run blocking last season. I think the reason they might be doing offense and defense versus first team and second team, I still think I would argue right now it's more of a depth thing. I still think they're figuring out their depth. You know, they only get so much time in spring practice to exactly assess where they're at, the offensive and defensive line. I think it's just one of those positions that's a little harder to judge at this point in spring.
Cool.
And, and looking at the defensive line, you know, I want to bring up Logan's comment from earlier.
I'll give you 1 and 2. It'll be Verse and probably McClendon.
Yeah, to me, those are the obvious ones. And right now, if we're gonna argue 1 and 2, I would say I think Jared Verse I would put over Derek McClendon right now, just because he's a little more experienced. I've seen him up against Bless Harris and against Robert Scott, and they've both had particularly good days. But tell me if you think I'm wrong, Tommy, because I haven't gotten to go to as many practices as you have. I got knocked out with COVID for a little bit there, but
No,
you know,
he's definitely the number one guy. For
yeah.
sure.
And you know, when you watch him against a guy like I feel like we see him go against Bless Harris more often than not, right? And Bless has been specifically talking about, I've heard him talk about how you know, Jared just presents him, they present each other with something different almost every single time. You know, they're still trying to figure out quite where each other are at, even though, you know, they're starting to learn each other's, you know,
That
moves.
was the verbiage that he used. He's like, I'm starting to learn.
Right. And he's just getting to kind of learning that, which is funny because I think with offensive line, defensive line, it is so much of a cerebral position. It is a chess game between those guys. And I think we talked about this a little bit at practice yesterday. These guys are going after each other, you know, practice after practice. They're not going up against new players. They're going up against the same guys kind of over and over. So I think once we see Jared first, Derek McClendon get out against some offensive linemen who don't have as many reps against them, I think this group is going to look really, really good. And for you, Tommy, is there anyone you're kind of earmarking as that DE3 right now, or kind of an impact defensive line player?
Just on the defensive line as a
Or
whole.
just or as an end. Let's do, are there any ends you think that are or that third guy right now? Because I think it's pretty obvious that top group is Jared Verse, it's Derek McClendon. But do you think there's any guy who you see standing out after them?
Not to the extent that they stand out.
That's kind of the thing. I don't know if there is a true DE3 right now. To me, they have a lot of these guys who can be versatile, who can go interior defensive line and who can bump out on the edge as well. They have a few guys who can do that. But I also think for the most part, we're going to see the defensive line, Jared Verse, Derek McClendon, then it's going to be Robert Cooper and Lovett. And to me, those are the four top defensive linemen on Florida State right now. Those are the guys who we're going to see the most. But it's one of those rotating rooms, right? I guess I want to ask you this, Tommy, before we talk about the defensive interior a little bit. How much do you think the loss of Jermaine Johnson, Keir Thomas, is going to be felt? How much of a drop off do you think it's going to be?
I think, I mean, there's obviously going to be a drop off, but I think that it won't be as drastic as everyone would make it seem. I think that Verse can be maybe not to that highest level of Jermaine Johnson, but definitely keep that line steady.
No, I agree. I think the thing with the defensive line, people are kind of just, I want to say overreacting, but there's this assumption that everything, you know,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good point that Noel Game Day, it's Logan brings up. He said Peyton. I think he is very raw. That's kind of the thing I would say. He's had flashes, and yeah, I mean I heard what Logan heard as well. I know he did very good at that first scrimmage. So I would say Peyton is probably that next guy who you would put on that list. But I want to talk about again the defensive interior when we're looking at the interior defense for the Seminoles, and we can go back over to PFF. Let's look at their runs. Their run stuff grade was, or their or run defensive grade last season was the best in the ACC. And man, they were just impressive. And to me, this is where you're going to feel the loss of Jermaine Johnson, especially the most as a run defender on the edge. I've just never seen anyone quite like it, in my opinion. And I think what he was doing last year, he was just anchoring that defense in kind of a different way, especially on the run side, more specifically.
Yeah. Another tackle that stood out yesterday was Jarrett Jackson. On a few plays, you know, he was just blowing through the line. Like they couldn't really stop him, and forced a couple, handoffs and a couple, hurries and throwing the ball away.
And didn't he actually get a fumble, Tommy, or did he cause? He almost caused a fumble,
I
right?
I don't think he caused the fumble. I think he picked it up and scored with it. I
Right,
think it
but
was Jackson.
I think for a lot of the
No,
plays
no,
that
it wasn't
yeah,
Jackson.
I know. I believe it was Jackson, and for a lot of the plays that we've seen where this defensive line has just been blowing up the O line, a lot of times I've seen Jarrett Jackson a lot recently. He is definitely one of those guys who's been standing out, especially the last few practices. And I think overall, Tommy, just from the position, they're going to be really, really good on the interior. And to me, it might be even the strength of the defense, that interior defensive line, the way they've been able to collapse this offensive line, how disruptive they've been just through these 11, 12 practices that we've seen. It should be one of those special groups for the Seminoles.
Definitely.
Yeah, and looking at a few of the other numbers, the pressure rate, Florida State again, second overall in pressure rate, and I know specifically Kier and Jermaine, man, in that Boston College game, I think they actually led the ACC that week in pressures, like the two of them together individually. So I don't know if they're going to be getting quite the pressure rate that the Seminoles were getting last season, but I think just looking at how this is going to play out for the Seminoles, the drop off for this group from last year to this year, it shouldn't be so much that the team should be that much worse, right? I think they
Yeah.
should improve in coverage, and with the defensive line still kind of having some of those interior guys in place, giving some of those edge guys the opportunity that they just weren't getting because of Jermaine and Kier. This room should look very, very good moving forward.
Yeah, and along with the defensive backs, they've been looking pretty good. They've been diagnosing plays pretty well. Uh, Dent, I think
Then
Dent's the interception leader.
man, and Jamie also, he's an impressive player to me, Tommy. There was one play yesterday on the goal line. I think they were up, the offense was about in between the 10 and the 5, and they were running straight up the gut. And I see just Jamie fly out of nowhere, like take a B gap and just absolutely meet whichever back it was, just one on one, and he just blew up the play. And I think
I
between
remember
him
you
and
saying that.
Akeem, what's up?
Remember you saying that? We thought it looked like almost a blitz almost.
Yeah, we thought he blitzed. That's how fast he was moving, and that's kind of how he was flying. And this defensive backfield, look, looking at the coverage from last season, right? They were middle of the pack last year, and I think the reason that Seminole fans should be optimistic about the defense moving forward, where they're gonna be, is that if you look, the defensive line, like we mentioned, they're not going to be as good as they were last year, but this will still be a very, very good, top group in the ACC overall. But I think from a coverage perspective, you look at all the guys that they're bringing or that they have in place that they brought in, some of the freshmen that they brought in.
Zray
This
Thomas.
Yeah, AZ Thomas, Sam McCall. I mean, those two guys, I think they're gonna get serious playing time at some point. I see them as those next guys up. Greedy Vance has been pretty good as well. I think we see some competition between him and Kevin Knowles kind of for that nickel spot. That's at least what I'm expecting right now, Tommy. That could change, but I think looking at this team from a coverage perspective, can they be one of those top ACC teams in your mind from coverage? Because I think this is a really young group and they're still improving. But
I haven't seen enough yet to make that call. I want to see them go against a team or go against a different team. Because like you were touching on earlier, going up against the same players every single time, you start to get a feel of what they're going to do. So I would like to see the more reactionary phase of that room and with the team as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree on that. I think it's like you said, it's just too early to tell kind of where this room is at. I will say I'm really encouraged by the depth they do have at this position. Where I want to see Sam and AZ both get opportunities next season
I
at some
definitely think
point.
they will.
Yeah, and where do you think they play them, Tommy? Because I think as we've seen throughout practice several times, we've seen them at outside corner, we've seen them at safety, we've seen them different spots in the defensive backfield. Where do you think each of those guys kind of ends up sticking, or do you think they just move them
I think
around?
I think outside corner is probably a safe bet. I don't think they're going to have McCall playing safety. I think that they're just giving a feel for all the other players they had because they rotated a bunch of players in that series in and out of safety. So
Yeah,
I would say that at least going up against them, who knows what matchups they're going to put up going against teams in the future. But I really like McCall on Wilson. That's a good matchup.
that has been an excellent matchup. I mean, they've had quite a few uh, like contested catches, some different things. And I remember specifically, I don't remember if it was on Wilson, but I remember the play where Tate threw an interception to Sam McCall, and and we don't have to talk about that play, Tommy, too much because I know you and I privately have talked a lot about that play, but his ball skills are impressive, and I think for both of these guys, I'd love to see Azarius or get some opportunity in special teams as well. I think he's an electric player when you get the ball in his hands, and they're both have that kind of ability. I don't want to say return ability necessarily, but they look like natural playmakers when you get the ball in their hands.
Yeah, as Raya or Az, he does not look new. That's for
No,
sure.
no, I think neither of them have had that kind of freshman moment that you might expect, right? Especially from a position that's so hard to me. Transitioning from a cornerback from high school to college, it is extremely difficult. And just to see the comfort level that these guys have, it's been incredibly impressive to me so far.
Yep.
And I do want to bring us over to another topic, a big picture topic, because we've been talking a lot about practice, but I want to talk about some realistic expectations for these Seminoles. I put it in the comments earlier for people to vote on how they're feeling about the over under of 6.5 wins for the Seminoles. But Tommy, obviously,
I don't know.
the
I'm on the 10 train. I'm just kidding.
obviously, this depends on the Seminole schedule, who they're playing. A lot of this is going to be schedule based, but when you kind of think of where this team has been at for these last 2 seasons, the improvements that we expect them to make on the offensive line, the depth improvements we expect them to have, the third year in the system for all these guys now, for most of these guys who are returning, obviously. What do you think is a realistic record for the Seminoles to achieve? And beyond just the record, how good do you think this team is going to be? Where do you think they're going to rank amongst the ACC?
Oh wow. That is a very controversial question.
I'm throwing some tough ones at you today, man. I wanna get the good interactions.
I think 6.5 is reasonable. I think more 7 and 5. I would say around that area, unless something goes completely wrong.
Yeah.
I
Well,
do.
no, and this is assuming like they let's this is all assuming, right, that the health wasn't to the level like it was last season with the offensive line. We're expecting some level of injury, but we're expecting to see at least most of these guys. So, yeah, just base it off that.
We're expecting to see some level of improvement as well. I do think the biggest improvement is going to be next season. I think that's when you're going to get the major jump that fans have been wanting to see. As far as where they're going to rank in the ACC, I don't really like that question. I'm going to say I'm going to say 4. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not, you didn't have to put a specific number on it, but I think assuming they're going to be out of those, I think they'll be that next tier or two down of the top teams, right? They're not going to be quite at the top of the conference next season, but I think it's realistic to expect this team to at least push some of these ACC contenders a little more than they were last season. And um,
And
I
who
think
knows?
in terms of
They might just come out and blow everyone's minds out.
but like I think you said, Tommy, that is more what we're expecting for 2023. I think with the Seminoles team next season, it's all about improvement, and because we expect that improvement, that should carry over to 2023 because a lot of the guys that we're talking about, a lot of the guys that we expect to be really good for this team this year should return and should be even better by then. And then, like we saw with this recent freshman class, obviously there's that main big disappointment that we don't have to spend any time on that. But this is what the 12th ranked class, and then or no, sorry, they were top 20 by this
Yeah, by
by
the
the
end.
time
Yeah,
by the end. I'm thinking of 2023 actually, or the next high school class. They're about 12th right now, but this is a top 20 recruiting class. A lot of, like I said, like
yeah.
I think two freshman offensive linemen. Uh, they obviously brought in the two defensive backs who we both expect to see some of next season. And I'll just say this for me. I think in terms of a record for the Seminoles, a realistic record, 7-5 is the baseline realistic record. If they're one win above that, if they're one win below that, I think either way, Seminole fans shouldn't be like completely happy, but I think just depending on how the team looks,
It
if
was
the team
19.
looks okay, it was 19. But if the team looks improved and there is that level of optimism and we see what we need to see from the offensive line next year, from this receiving core, kind of the expectations we have, they should be able to carry on that momentum into 2023. And for Mike Norvell, this is a particularly important year, right? Because I think if you improve your record by a lot, it gives you a lot of optimism. It kind of gets fans off your back, and it's not completely, because I think there'll still be a lot of fans who have even higher expectations for the Seminoles, but they improved to 8-4, right? Let's say next season, or 8 wins next season. That would be huge for Mike Norvell
Oh
personally.
yeah,
Versus if they're Tommy, if they're 5-7 or 6-6 again, I mean, what do you think the reaction's going to be like? Do you think that seat? I mean, I'm not saying like a
depends on
hot
what.
seat situation, but how do you think this plays out for Mike one way or the other?
Well, I think there's a couple different things. It depends on what side of the fan base you ask, really, because there's
Yeah,
there can be some crazy fans. Um, how they lose if they do make those numbers is a big thing. Like if you're losing in overtime every single one of those, that makes a difference. I think that his seat will get hotter though if he does go 6-6 again, and then you're probably looking at, I don't know, some pressure from people in charge.
yeah. I mean, I think they're like if they just have another one of these seasons that they had last season, and like you said, I think All depends on the improvement level, where the team is at. If the team is 6-6 and they lose a bunch of one-score games and overtime losses, and the team looks much improved, the offensive line is average to above average. The wide receiver core is average. The running room is as good as it was, or even better than last season, and the defense improves. Um, I like obviously that seat still might be hot because people just look at win-loss record, but I think for Mike, for the staff, the key year for them is 2023. Not that 2022 isn't important, but 2022 is going to be that stepping stone for them to take this program to the next level, to the expectation level that Florida State fans have for their teams.
Yeah. I mean, don't lose that first game. I think I would quit.
Oh,
Quit.
man, oh God. I mean, thanks for bringing that up. Thinking about FBS schools. And I think I told you about this before, Tommy. But we'll end the show after this, kind of on this sort of note. For that Jacksonville State game, I'm a student journalist. I'm about to graduate from FSU in about a month, and I think looking at that game when everything happened, I was in the student section personally. I was about 20 rows up from most of the game, corner end zone. Then, FSU fans were confident. They started walking out of the stadium, Tommy. They were, a lot of the student section started emptying out. And then, I saw, some seats come up in front of me that are, first 5 rows of the student section was emptying out. So, me, my friends, my roommates were like, oh, no, we want to go get a closer view. I go up to get the closer view, Tommy. I was about 15 feet away from that play when it happened. It was, I don't know if I would call it exactly traumatizing, but that is one of the most, that's one of those memories that's going to stick in my brain forever with FSU football.
Yeah. Yep. I remember just face palming, but it is what it is.
And that's the thing. It's like, I think obviously the season, there was a lot of ups and downs, more ups at the ends than downs, and the season started 0-4. They bring it back. They win 5 games. But man, they just can't have that start they had to last season again. And if they do, you want to talk about a hot seat, man. If they're 1-4 or 0-3, go in the 2022 season, there's going to be a large portion of this fan base that is very unhappy and will be very vocal about that. So,
yeah.
That's I think where we're gonna end today, everybody. This is Noles Quality Control. Again, thank you so much to Tommy for coming on today. Everyone, if you haven't already, check the description below. You can find Tommy's Twitter there. You can find Tomahawk Nation. Make sure you go over and you're reading all of the reports that Tommy and I are putting out after practice. Again, we'll be doing another show on Friday at 1:30 Eastern time, or around then. At least I know we were a little late today, but we'll be on with the editor of Tomahawk Nation. We'll be talking some big picture things. We'll be talking the spring game, and we'll be talking more insights from spring practice. So if you enjoyed the show today, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit that notification button right next to the subscribe button, that little bell right there, so you can know when we're going live. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys again soon. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks, Logan.
Thanks, Logan. Appreciate you hopping in the comments, man. And we'll be reporting right after Thursday's practice, and I'll see you guys on Friday. Peace.